Today's guest is one of the most polarizing voices in politics.
Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, it shouldn't be controversial to say that no American should die for Israel.
A former hedge fund analyst who left Wall Street, he's launched an anti-woke investment fund, sued the Federal Reserve, and is now running for governor of Florida at 31 years old.
Quit OnlyFans or pay your taxes. It's going to be a 50% OnlyFans sin tax. Sophie Rain is nearing $42 million in taxes that she will owe the state of Florida.
One would assume that she would just leave the state.
Fine by me.
A fourth-generation Floridian who dropped out of college at 21 to launch his own hedge fund, he's built a career defying powerful institutions.
Those men or women implicated in Epstein's crimes, I would not just support the death penalty, but the death warrant that I would sign would be for public execution.
In this episode, we'll explore the ideas that have made him a target of Blackstone, AIPAC, and the Republican Party, explore the tactics being used to bury his career, and question if he is a dangerous extremist or the only person exposing the truth about how politics really works.
The Florida state government is lending the Israeli government $385 million. It's not anti-Semitic to oppose every single one of our tax dollars being sent to Benjamin Netanyahu to fuel his war.
James Fishback, welcome to the Jack Neel Podcast.
Hey, Jack.
Good place to start here. Trump started a war with Iran, and with thousands of American Marines already heading to the Middle East, and within the fear of ground troops and a national draft, the price of gas is skyrocketing across the country and in your home state of Florida. James, is the war in Iran actually for America?
It isn't. This war is a direct repudiation of what voters, Republican and Democrat, came out and supported when they voted for President Trump in November of 2024. We voted against new foreign wars, and we just found ourselves entangled in one, not to our benefit, but to the benefit of apparently U.S.'s closest ally, which it isn't, but they say Israel. And so this war very simply is a war that Israel and Netanyahu have wanted to get into now for 20 or 30 years. You know, two things can be true at the same time, Jack. One, Iran is a dictatorial, homicidal regime that persecutes Christians, that oppresses women, that chants death to America. That can be true, and it is true. It can also be true that Iran, like North Korea, like Sudan, like Somalia, like many other countries around the world that all fall under that same criteria, Iran did not pose an imminent threat to the United States of America. And so why is it that all of a sudden we are getting into a war that isn't just about us and Israel dropping bombs on Iran and killing upwards of 2,000 civilians? We've already lost 13 U.S. service members. I was at the interment of Major Cody Cork from Florida, Winter Haven, Florida, this week on Monday. And to see his family so distraught, his life taken so suddenly. Major Cork was a war hero. The 12 other service members we have lost were war heroes as well. And at the end of the day, it shouldn't be controversial to say this, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, whether you're a Christian, Muslim, Jew, rich, poor, whether you're from Florida or you live in California. It shouldn't be controversial to say that no American should die for Israel.
So who actually benefits from this war?
The Israeli government in its current form, there's this expansionist angle that Israel has always sought after. They've always wanted to expand their borders beyond what they currently are. And clearly, in a world where you have competing spheres of influence, competing regional superpowers, Israel is one of them, Saudi Arabia is another, Iran, Egypt was one in an earlier time, so was Libya. But Israel is in a unique position now that if Iran is defeated, they become the regional superpower. They call this the hegemon in the world of foreign policy. And so they can become the regional hegemon in the Middle East if Iran is defeated. And what does that mean? It means you have the seat at the table. You set the terms for trade, for supply chains, for negotiation, for diplomacy, for all of that. And so Iran, objectively, yeah, Iran is a bad regime full of really bad people. But Iran is also, again, purely objectively, is a counterweight to Israel's sphere of influence in the Middle East. And so if you get rid of Iran, you get rid of that deterrent to Israeli supremacy in the Middle East. And so it's natural. If there were a competing power, if Mexico were the next China, right, and they were competing for our resources, our influence, it would make sense rationally for Washington to want to counter that. And so Israel's position is one both crazy, but also rational if you view it through an objective lens. It's in no way justified from a humanitarian perspective, but that's how I would objectively and rationally look at where the different pieces are in the chessboard.
So you're saying it does benefit America?
No, it benefits Israel. It benefits America if you think that anything that benefits Israel benefits America. And that is the lie that AIPAC has sold for years now. AIPAC, in their own words, take them at their own word. Their website says on the homepage, we lobby for pro-Israel policies. Okay, fine. What if a pro-Israel policy is not a pro-America policy? In fact, what if a pro-Israel policy is an anti-American policy? What if a pro-Israel policy leads to the death of 13 U.S. service members in just a matter of 4 weeks and leads to gas prices rising at the fastest rate in 30 years? People in my home state of Florida are already seeing that pain at the pump. We're paying $6, $7 more to fill up every single time we go to the gas station in just the last month. And so what is definitely a pro-Israel policy, objectively, getting rid of Iran, that regime that has chanted death to Israel, that is clearly a pro-Israel policy, giving them more influence in the region, but that is not a pro-America policy. And so again, I zoom out and say, at a time where everybody wants to point fingers and say, you're wrong, I think actually both sides are kind of right on the Iran war. One side, the neocon, Marco Rubio, Donald Trump, Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner side, as much as I don't want to disagree with them on the Israeli position, they are right that Iran is a dictatorial, homicidal regime. But where they're wrong is that Iran posed an imminent threat that necessitated the kind of kinetic force, the kind of bombs being dropped, the civilians being lost. That's what is also true. And so that's the way I've approached this to our shared love for speech and debate, is acknowledge not truth in a superficial kumbaya way, but acknowledge where there is actually an intersection of truth between both sides. Because I think far too often, if we come into this and say, well, Iran really wasn't a bad regime, of course they were, where I draw the distinction is that Iran was bad, but they were not posing an imminent existential threat to the United States of America. In fact, if your standard was bad people posing an imminent threat, we would be bombing the cartels right now who are sending over poisonous, addictive fentanyl across the southern border that is killing upwards of 100,000 Americans every single year. That poses a far bigger threat from the Mexican cartels than anything the Iranian regime has done in the last 10 years.
So why do you think this war is happening right now?
Well, there is the ultimate cause and the proximate cause. The ultimate cause is all the reasons we've talked about. Netanyahu, Israel, the Israel lobby. Pat Buchanan said it best that the U.S. Congress really was Israeli-occupied territory. The influence of the Israeli government in U.S. politics runs deep. It goes back many, many years. That is the ultimate cause. This is a war that serves Israel's interests. Does it serve U.S. interests? I would be lying to say if it didn't. I don't think the world is better off for a nuclear Iran. I think what Iran did to the U.S. embassy in Beirut in 1983, they should have paid the price for that. But you don't pay the price for something like that this many years later. The time to retaliate was in 83, 84, 85, not in 2026, 2027. And so the proximate cause is really what I think you're getting at, is why now? Why now? Because if you're actually worried about a threat of a country that has openly threatened the United States, that has nuclear weapons, that has the ability to launch intercontinental ballistic missiles, you'd be bombing North Korea right now, not Iran. I'm not advocating either, of course. The proximate cause, I believe to be two things. It is a very convenient distraction from the revelations in the Epstein files, which we were told, by the way, 6 months ago, they were on her desk, Pam Bondi, that is, Pam Blondie. Then they were a Democrat hoax. They didn't exist. And it wasn't until Thomas Massie, who's really been an American patriot, and Ro Khanna from here in California, who actually stepped up and called Cap and said, no, we want to see the files. We're going to force the DOJ to release the files. And we've seen, although there have been redactions, although we haven't gotten the full 6 million files, we've just seen how troubling these files are. I mean, George Orwell said it best in 1989, the party's final and most essential command was to deny the evidence of your eyes and ears. And that's what people in the Republican Party have told us for the last couple of months is this is a Democrat hoax. It's far overblown. Let's just move on. And Jack, as someone who's voted Republican my entire life, I can't look at those files and look at the crimes so openly bragged about and move on. I think those men and women who are implicated in those files must be brought to justice. And there's very few things that could overshadow the criminality scandal of the Epstein files. But bombing Iran is one of those rare exceptions. And so I don't think that it is a coincidence that just as the pressure was turning up, just as everyone was talking about this, that all of a sudden we're bombing Iran. Second, I think that the disaffection, the frustration over the lack of the golden age, the fact that when we say we still haven't reversed the Biden inflation, young college grads are getting turned away from jobs that they're qualified for, and those jobs are being handed over to unqualified foreign laborers from India and China. Good people, smart people, I'm sure, but the American economy must work for Americans first and foremost. When you've got private equity firms like Blackstone, which I know all too well working in the hedge fund world, buying, hoarding single-family homes, not to fix them up, Jack, not to lay down some new tile and restore them and then put them back on the market for a family of 4 to buy in and become a family of 6 or 7. No, but to hoard those homes, to take them off the market forever and to rent them back to us. We said no to slavery a long time ago, and a modern form of slavery is this idea that you can be denied home ownership. So I think this lingering yet long-standing frustration that the economy isn't working, yet again, another convenient way to distract from that by saying, well, we've got to rally behind the cause, patriotism. We saw what happened after 9/11. We even saw what happened, how popular the Iraq War was, believe it or not, in the early days. Certainly not 24, 36 months afterward, but very, very convenient distractions to really the two biggest scandals in modern history, which is the K-shaped recovery, Wall Street doing well, and Main Street doing poorly, often at the expense of Wall Street. And then second, of course, the controversy over the Epstein files.
When I think about the Epstein files being a distraction for the war, I could see where that perspective makes sense. But do you think it would also be fair to say that it's kind of a chicken and the egg thing, that the Epstein files are a distraction from the war itself?
I think, honestly, the way to settle this question is, which one did you ask about first? The Epstein files of the war. Which one was top of mind for you, Jack? Which one is at the front of every single newspaper for the last 3 weeks since we started this bombing campaign on February 28th? Which one has contributed to the highest gas prices that we've seen since 2022? And so I think that the cover-up around the Epstein files totally backfired to the point where even Republicans that I'm meeting on the campaign trail, people that voted proudly for President Trump all 3 times, are saying, I've seen enough from Pam Bondi, from Kash Patel, from the DOJ, that they would continue to cover. I mean, the Republican Party has always been particularly proud of standing up against the men and even women who would traffic children. I mean, think about the movie Sound of Freedom, right? Came from a conservative point of view, a conservative studio in Angel Studios. And so the Republican Party, conservatives, especially in my home state of Florida, kind of ground zero for Republican politics, have always prided ourselves on, we're going to stand up to powerful men who are trafficking children. And that line that we heard all too often in The Sound of Freedom, children are not for sale. God's children are not for sale. And yet our party is the one that is covering up the greatest sex trafficking scandal in human history.
Do you think the war bodes well for the GOP in the next election, or do you think it bodes negatively?
It bodes negatively, without a doubt. You might have seen this CNN poll last week where they said 100% of MAGA still supports our MAGA president. So 100% of self-identified Trump supporters still support Trump. And so what I think is going to happen is there's going to be 2 waves of frustration as a result from the war. The first of which are people like me who voted for President Trump in 2024, in large part because he rejected the neocon DC consensus that we had to be the world's police force, that we had to subscribe to this very vapid idea that Israel is our greatest ally, that we had to do the bidding of every single country in the Middle East to appease Israel. He rejected that. And so it's really a blatant hypocritical stance to say no foreign wars and, oh wait, A year in, here's another foreign war with no end in sight, by the way. It's going to be quick. We've totally decapitated them. Why did you ask for $200 billion then last week? This is going to be a quick war that's going to be over in a matter of weeks. So there's two waves of frustration. The first, and I'm already pissed. The first is just the total betrayal of no new foreign wars. Here's a foreign war, and if you're complaining about it, you're a radical left Democrat. That's the first wave, and you're going to lose maybe 25 to 30% of voters on that. The second wave is coming. It's yet to fully materialize, and that is the economic pain that will come from the war. Higher oil, to higher gas, to more at the tank, to less disposable income, to cutting down other parts of the economy. Think about it this way. If you go to fill up on gas twice a week, 8 times a month, $6 to fill up, you're paying more than you were a month ago. So you've got $48 out of your pocket that you could have had for a haircut or fast food. Here in California, In-N-Out Burger. Back in Florida, we might do a little bit of Steak and Shake, a little burger fry, something else. You're going to feel that downstream. That's income that would have been spent in hospitality, in leisure, getting a haircut, going out with your kids, bowling, movies, whatever the case is. And so you're going to see the second and third order effects of that. And so unequivocally, this war is bad for Republicans because they're the ones pushing it. It's bad for the incumbent party, which is the Republican Party, for the two reasons that it feels like a total betrayal, and you're going to lose folks, and you've already lost folks on that. The second is the economic pain that's going to come from the war. We're seeing the early signs of that with gas prices up $1. The longer that the Strait of Hormuz stays closed, the greater the oil price will go up, and that's a direct correlation to gas prices here at home, whether you're in California or in Florida.
Random question really quick. Have you ever looked up if the shampoo you're using can disrupt your hormones? Because if you're like me, you probably didn't know that over 70% of men's grooming products have chemicals that can disrupt your endocrine system or your testosterone levels. Now, I care a lot about my health, but I didn't really think any healthy products could make my hair look good, so that's why I was so glad I met the guys at Based. They gave me their Shower Duo shampoo conditioner, and it's made with plant-based ingredients like peppermint or argan oil, so there's no sulfates, no hormone disruptors, nothing that's gonna mess with your body. And after using it for a while now, genuinely my hair does feel way healthier, like clean and hydrated as opposed to dry and dull. And honestly, I think it looks better too. So if you've been using the same products forever without thinking twice about what's actually in them, make sure to check out Based Body Works. It's a plant-based, all-natural men's grooming brand that actually performs. So if you guys want to try it out, just go to jackneel.com/based and use the code JackNeel at checkout for 20% off your first order. Plus, you get a free toiletry bag when you buy your first set. So again, that is jackneel.com/based, or you can scan the QR code on screen. But anyway, guys, back to the podcast. Do you think the U.S. will lose the Iran war?
We already have, in many respects, because it's not a war that is easily winnable in traditional terms. When you say victory, what does victory look like? I was supportive, by the way, of what President Trump did to Maduro in December. Maduro is a maniac who didn't just kill innocent Venezuelans, he killed innocent Americans. When he opened up the prisons and sent Tren de Aragua gang members here to flood our border when Kamala Harris was the border czar, when those same gang members took over condominium complexes all over the country, when they pushed fentanyl on young children who overdosed, that's a direct consequence of Maduro being in power. And so I supported the fact that a grand jury in New York City indicted Maduro. He was a fugitive from justice, and President Trump brought him to justice, and now he will stand trial for those crimes. He posed actually an imminent threat to the United States, not in a nuclear way, not in an intercontinental ballistic missile, not that he was going to knock out Brickell in downtown Miami, but he was certainly responsible for the death of thousands of Americans and posed an ongoing threat, especially in my state of Florida, which is the largest diaspora of Venezuelan migrants, where a lot of the drugs were coming directly from Venezuela and flooding our streets. That military involvement was very different. There was a clear win. Maduro out of power. Done. We've kind of won that. Now, it'll take time to install a new regime Clearly, there's a kind of a holdover government now with the vice president there. Seems to be more of a U.S. ally. I think that Venezuela is one of those countries where you don't have to believe anything hypothetical about the fact that the Venezuelans can do nation building because they were the most prosperous, the wealthiest nation in South America up until the late 1990s. And so they've done it before. They can do it again. But the Iran conflict doesn't have a clear binary. What does victory look like? And that's my frustration with the war as well is, one, why are we at war? But even if you put that to the side, okay, we're at war. How do we know we've won? We get 7 different criteria, 7 different competing explanations that we've heard from President Trump, from Vice President Vance, from Secretary Rubio, from the press secretary, Carolyn Leavitt, about why we're at war. Let's just go through them really quick. Iran posed an imminent threat. There's no intel to back that up. We saw the resignation of Joe Kent, who I had dinner with last week in D.C. We saw Tulsi Gabbard be unable to answer that question under oath in front of Congress last week. There's been no intelligence offered up. I mean, at least the Bush administration had the common courtesy to give us a false pretext with weapons of mass destruction lie, as opposed to there's not even a pretext here at all as to why we're going to this war. So that's the first. The second is regime change, just the general typical neocon George Bush, Dick Cheney. Democracy is back in. Let's install democracy. The third is the protesters who were being gunned down. And there, 2 things can be true at the same time. Once again, there were in fact protesters who were being innocently slaughtered on the streets of Tehran who should never be attacked by the government. The second thing is that the number of protesting deaths was grossly exaggerated and was used as propaganda by Israel to fuel our involvement, to get us more interested in this war. The fourth is retribution for 1983, for the hostage crisis in 79, for all of the Iranian proxies, whether it's Hezbollah or the Houthis, for the planting of Iranian IEDs during the Iraq War that did in fact kill and maim hundreds of U.S. service members. All of these things can be true. But again, it all boils down to that question, what was the imminent threat? And so what you've seen just there is 5, 6 different competing explanations. Neither of them have any shred of evidence to back up why we would go to war now. Jack, we just met 20 minutes ago. But if we had known each other at a high school debate tournament, we bonded over the fact beforehand that one of our favorite high school debate tournaments was the Patriot Games at George Mason University. And let's just say we were there when I was there in 2012. You were in middle school at the time. But when I was there in 2012 and you gave me a funny look and you slapped me. And then today, the first time we had seen each other since then, I pulled out a Glock and pistol whipped you. 2 things can be true. You shouldn't have slapped me, and I shouldn't have pistol whipped you with a .38 special. And so this is the dynamic. This is the dilemma. I don't ever want to minimize. I don't ever want to explain away the horrific crimes that this Iranian regime has committed against innocent Americans, service members in Iraq, the Marines at the barracks in 1983 in Beirut, all of the victims of the regional proxies that have been backed, like the Houthis and Hezbollah. But it always comes down to what was that imminent threat. And so to come full circle, can we win the war? No, because we don't even know what victory looks like. We don't know what winning looks like. It would kind of be like we pull out 3 board games, Monopoly, Risk, and Twister, and we lay them all out. And I tell you, Jack, do you think you can beat it? Do you think? And we literally take the Risk pieces and put them on the Monopoly board, and then there's the Twister thing. And I say, Jack, do you think you can win this game that I just made up that has no clear-cut conclusion, no clear-cut falsifiable victory? Can you win?
No, but I'll play if you give me some money. You have a impressive finance background, working in Wall Street traditionally, but what do you think most people misunderstand about the way money is flowing to kind of comprehend what the different interests are at play and who's backing those interests?
I spent the last 10 years working at hedge funds. The one I started out of college called Macrovoyant, which is a play on the word clairvoyant. And the idea of a macro trader, which is what I've been, is instead of investing in saying, I like Tesla because the new Model Y will drive itself, or I like Apple because the MacBook Neo will see good revenue. What a macro trader does is ignores those questions. A macro trader says, how is the Federal Reserve going to screw it up next? is inflation going to go out of control because the Fed, after 2020, printed $5 trillion along with Congress, kept rates pinned at zero for a year longer than they should have, and then engendered the worst inflation since a guy named Paul Volcker had to break the back of inflation in the early 1980s. And so when I looked at that, working at a hedge fund, I put on quite literally $2 billion worth of interest rate derivatives trades to profit from that breakdown in the system. That's the kind of investing that I did. Gold, oil, interest rates, inflation, all of that to get a better understanding of what is really at stake when the government, the Federal Reserve, global geopolitical players are moving pieces around the chessboard. And so what I would say is, what do people typically get wrong about Wall Street in that sense? The same people who oppose Trump or support him will have no issue making money if they oppose him on his success, or losing money if they support him. And so it's fascinating that people are able to separate. And I had to struggle with that very early on, right? I'm a conservative. I support President Trump. I supported him from the moment he came down the golden escalator. I certainly feel a little bit differently now given the war with Iran and all of that. But I had to separate my political view of him from what the financial impact would be of his policies. And so I would quite literally go to a Trump rally and wear the MAGA hat and be cheering. But then I had to look at the sober reality of, well, the infrastructure week is never coming, or healthcare reform is not going to happen, and therefore these healthcare stocks that have been mispriced are going to remain mispriced, or the Fed's going to continue to be verbally assaulted by Donald Trump in the summer of 2019, and therefore we're not going to get the rate cuts that the interest rate futures market had been predicting. And so all of that is to say, I'm amazed at how the most successful people in Wall Street are able to separate their views of politics from the way they actually make money. And that's something that I struggled with at first. And I was proud to say I kind of fully separated them near the end of that.
People see all the money flowing from AIPAC to U.S. politicians.
Yeah.
Why do you think AIPAC is buying out U.S. politicians, and what exactly are they buying?
They're buying allegiance. They're buying an allegiance to an idea, which is, in two words, Israel first. You know, there's this idea that, you know, if you, people like Randy Fine, who's a Republican congressman from Florida, he is very pro-Israel to the point where after he met Netanyahu 2 years ago, he posted on Twitter, "I'm not going to wash my hand so I can shake my kids when I see them at home and let them know that daddy touched Netanyahu." His words. People accuse someone like him of having a dual allegiance, an allegiance to the United States and to Israel. I think that's false. I think people like Randy Fine and a lot of these AIPAC-bought politicians have one singular allegiance, and that is to the best interests of Israel. If those interests somehow, randomly, like a broken clock, twice a day, end up aligning with the U.S., they're fine for it. But most of the time, their primary concern is how can we fight for the Israeli government? I mean, Ted Cruz himself said it when he ran for the U.S. Senate. He said, "I am running to be the staunchest advocate for Israel in the United States Congress." Can you imagine saying that for Albania or Brazil or Colombia or Mexico or even Sweden, as much as I am a fan of the IKEA meatballs? The idea of saying that I'm running to represent a foreign country's interest in the United States Congress. And so this is the real dilemma of what AIPAC represents, is they're buying allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which it stands, one nation under God. One nation. You pledge your allegiance to one nation. And that nation is this one, not Israel. And so for me, it's not even so much AIPAC alone. It is any foreign interest money, anything that tries to push for pro-Israel, pro-Qatar, pro-Sweden, whatever the case is, any money that is coming in to push pro-foreign policies is not something that I ever want to be on the receiving end of. And I got to be honest, I'm not voting for anybody whose AIPAC tracker is not neon green, which is to say they've taken no AIPAC money.
Have you taken any money?
No, I never have and I never will. And the reason why is I don't want conflicts of interest. For the same reason, you can't be a lawyer and prosecute a case and also be the same lawyer representing the defendant on the case. You have a conflict of interest. The same evidence that you would use to prosecute the guy for selling drugs to people in Tallahassee in 1997, like Byron Donalds, I digress. But the same reason you can't be that guy prosecuting the case and also the defense attorney is because where do you choose? You have information here that definitely nails the guy, but you're also representing the defendant. You definitely have information that exonerates the defendant, but you're trying to secure a conviction. So what do you do, Jack? That is the dilemma. And I don't ever want to be put in a position where one, my integrity would be compromised, where I'd ever have to feel like I chose between one of those two things. But I also would never want the public to think, even for a moment, that my judgment has been tainted by AIPAC money. And that even if I had made the right decision, I didn't do it because of someone else's checkbook. And so for me, my AIPAC tracker is going to stay neon green. My opponent, Byron Donalds, will stay blood red because there's nothing that he won't do for AIPAC. He's taken, at this point, $45 million between AIPAC, corporate political action committees, and a number of hedge fund billionaires, one of whom was actually in the Epstein files, named 39 times. The most recent email was between this hedge fund billionaire and Jeffrey Epstein himself, where Mr. Epstein asked the man if he needed any supplies sent to the island on his next trip down there. What supplies? Was Jeffrey Epstein sending down bandages? Was he sending down Nespresso pods? Or what kind of supplies would one Jeffrey Epstein be sending to a hedge fund billionaire on Epstein's island?
So I guess as it pertains to the war, and I'll touch on some of your more generalized policies a bit later in this interview, if you were elected governor tomorrow, what would your first day look like as governor of Florida?
Be a very long day. We would need a lot of caffeine to get through that one. I believe that day one is about setting tone for what the first 100 and then the first 4 years would look like. There's a couple things I would do on my first day. As we sit here today, the Florida state government, not the federal government, they're doing a lot of other things, but the Florida state government is lending the Israeli government $385 million directly to the Israeli government from our government using the state pension fund. That's money from teachers and firefighters and first responders.
That's yearly?
Yeah. $385 million every year. If you own a small landscaping business and you want to buy a new chainsaw or lawnmower and you went to that same building and said, hey, you lent Netanyahu $385 million. I'm not asking for that. I'm not even asking for a tenth of that. I just need $3,850 to buy this new lawnmower and this new hitch for my truck so I can go a little bit further and help cut the lawns of vets in my community that I'm fighting to serve. No, we don't do that for people like you. We do that for governments like them. In fact, Israel is the only foreign country that is a recipient of the Florida state government lending money. And they do that by buying Israeli war bonds. These are government bonds, much like U.S. Treasury securities that trade on the open market. They were purchased after October 7th to, quote, stand in solidarity with the Israeli government and stand in solidarity we have. You can do that, by the way, by praying and showing your affection for, obviously, the lives that were lost. And I can tell you as a Christian, I was horrified by what happened on October 7th. I prayed for weeks and months. We held dedications at our masses. We dedicated individual masses at our parish to the hostages and to the innocents who were being killed on both sides. It's something totally separate to lend $350 million to a foreign government to perpetuate a war. And that's exactly what we've done. And so the first thing I would literally do is I would walk down to the state pension fund as governor and we would sell those bonds on the open market. This is not a contract, it's not an agreement. In the same way you could sell Apple or Tesla stock, you could also sell these treasury bonds from Israel.
Do you think it's anti-Semitic to divest from Israeli bonds?
No. It'd be just as it wouldn't be anti-Slavic to divest from Eastern European bonds. This idea of anti-Semitism has been really overblown. Let me be very clear. I condemn hatred of Jews. I condemn hatred of Muslims. I condemn hatred of Christians. But saying you don't want more of our money to be lent to a foreign government doesn't make you an anti-Semite. It makes you a patriot. And in the same way that the fringes of the left, Jack, would call us racist for years for simply saying, we're done with the white guilt. We don't want you telling the white kids to apologize to the black kids, and we don't want you telling the black kids that the system is rigged and they are victims and they are oppressed and there's no way they can make it. No, those are slanderous lies straight from the devil's mouth. It's not racist to oppose DEI, affirmative action, white guilt, just as it's not anti-Semitic to oppose every single one of our tax dollars being sent to Benjamin Netanyahu to fuel his war.
Are there any other major policy changes you would make on day one?
Yes. There's a lot to do. I'm a constitutional guy. Congress has to authorize war. The president can use armed forces for self-defense, obviously to prevent an imminent threat from attacking the homeland. But when it comes to issues of war and peace, that is left to Congress in the U.S. Constitution. My view is really simple. There are 14,000 members of the Florida National Guard. My commitment to them is I will defend the Guard as Florida governor. I will never allow a single one of them to be deployed to a foreign war unless it is explicitly authorized by the United States Congress. It's really common sense. If this war is so necessary, so justified, so overwhelmingly clear, then you'll have no issue debating it and getting Thomas Massey's support on the right and Ro Khanna's support on the left and everyone in between to be able to authorize this war. So I'm going to stand up and defend the Guard and make sure that our incredible National Guardsmen in Florida are never deployed to a foreign war that is not authorized by Congress. I'm also going to use the Florida National Guard for something that I wish the governor here in California would do, which is to tackle the homeless epidemic that has really hurt your state, but if I'm being honest as well, has hurt my state. 3 days before Christmas this past year, a 74-year-old woman by the name of Rita Londrick was stabbed to death inside of a Barnes & Noble in one of the wealthiest towns in the entire state of Florida by a 40-year-old homeless man named Antonio Brown. If you're not safe inside of a bookstore 3 days before Christmas in one of the wealthiest towns in Florida, you're not safe anywhere. And the homeless crisis, whether it's where I grew up in Fort Lauderdale, downtown Miami, Jacksonville, St. Pete, Tampa, even smaller towns like DeLand, we have to get to the bottom of it. And the way to do that is to remove the homeless encampments from our street, to make sure that the people who are living on the streets, who are suffering with addiction, who are suffering with alcoholism, that they get the treatment that they desperately need so we can get the safety that we desperately deserve. I don't think of politics as big, highfalutin policy platforms. Here's how I think of it, Jack. Heaven forbid, 2 years from now, I come back to LA because I have a real craving for an In-N-Out burger as governor. Again, heaven forbid, I see you on the street outside of In-N-Out Burger, and there's a heroin needle, there's a suitcase, you're sitting in your own urine, and I say, Jack, it's time to go. Let me take care of you. Let's get you the treatment. Let's get you care. There's nothing you can say in that moment that's going to explain yourself out of it. It's going to explain why you shouldn't come with me. That's how I think we need to view, one, the homeless crisis in particular, but politics generally, is let's make it about our brothers and sisters, our friends, our neighbors. If we saw someone in our own life who is living on the street, addicted to poison, on the path to overdosing or having already overdosed multiple times and given Narcan at the taxpayer's expense, you don't have a choice anymore. It's time for you to go, not to prison. It's time for you to go to a treatment center, to get back on your feet, to once again become that productive member of society that I know that they can be. And I say this as someone who lost my uncle in 2003 to the poison that came across the southern border. My uncle was living on the streets. That we as a state and as a country need to look out for our neighbors. And genuine compassion is not letting our brothers and sisters die on the street. It's not letting our brothers and sisters shoot up heroin or fentanyl on the street. It's not letting our brothers and sisters quite literally live and sleep in their own urine. It is to extend a helping hand, but a very firm helping hand that says, it's time to go. I'm not going to let go until you get help.
And how does the National Guard play into that exactly?
Well, they're under my direct control as governor. And what I would do is I'd mobilize them for a couple reasons. One, I have the constitutional authority to do so. Two, they're actually very good at this. They are on the front lines of disaster relief after hurricanes. They're also a big part of recognizing the needs in our communities prior to the storm, so ramping up that hurricane preparation as well as post-storm disaster relief. So they know our communities very well. They are very good at working with people, at extending that hand, at being patient. We don't need them to go out with rifles, with 5.56 rounds. We don't need night vision goggles. We need someone who, one, is going to be a shock and awe presence, but is also going to be a compassionate, patient individual. And the great thing about the Florida National Guard is they are from the communities that we are going to help. And so they'll know their communities best. What's going to work in Jacksonville may not be what's going to work in South Florida. What's going to work in Pensacola, which is effectively the deep South. The old joke in Florida was the further north you go, the further south you go in the country. What's going to work in the Florida Panhandle may not work in Tampa or St. Pete. And so I trust the Florida National Guard, as prepared and professional as they are, as substantiated many a times before and after hurricanes. I trust them to carry out that mission, and I would personally lead that mission as Florida governor to make sure that those people they get off the street, not just for their own good, but I hurt for the 6 or 8-year-old girl who has to turn to her mom outside of the Immaculate Conception Basilica in downtown Jacksonville and say, "Mommy, is that man asleep or is he dead?" On the walk to get coffee or ice cream after a movie, why are all of these people on the street? Aren't we the richest country in the world? How is it that the Pentagon just asked for $200 billion, that the Pentagon is willing to take the National Guard, that the White House has not even taken the fact that a draft is still on the table? And yet we don't have the resources, the money, the attention, or even the care to take care of our own, including thousands of homeless vets in Florida. And so for me, it's not just about those people who are living on the streets who need help. It's about the rest of us being able to live in a dignified, modern society that does not allow our streets to be overtaken by people who are not evil, who are not incorrigible, but are merely lost, are merely wayward sheep. And I welcome the day they can be found and they can be part of our community once again.
It seems like this is the most overlooked problem, at least in my life. Because, I mean, if you live in Los Angeles or South Florida, that is something you deal with and actively have to think about every day. I mean, we're in the main part of Los Angeles right now, and it's also the worst part of Los Angeles, downtown. And it's a complex issue, but I could see where the National Guard would be particularly useful in helping tackle it. I do want to touch on the Epstein files. Would you have any policy affecting the release, anything surrounding it?
I would. There's a lot of talk about the island. The island, Epstein's Island, Little St. James, it's in the U.S. Virgin Islands in the Caribbean. There's an island that doesn't get talked about enough, even though it was actually where Epstein did in fact live most of the time, did in fact commit most of his crimes with his co-conspirators, and that island is in Florida. That island is in Palm Beach County. That island is the town of Palm Beach, the richest town in my state. What's interesting about Florida is we don't have to change a single law to bring these people to justice. Capital sexual battery against a minor does not have a statute of limitation. That means just like murder, whether it happened 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago, is irrelevant. You can bring a case anytime. And so one of those promises is to appoint a special prosecutor to reopen the Epstein investigation. We know a lot more today than we did 10, 15 years ago with the release of the files. That is where I would start, but certainly not where I would end, and just bring people in for questioning. Throw the book at them. Bring people to justice. I get flack, not from voters, but I get flack from CNN and even Fox News for saying this, but capital sexual battery, Jack, in Florida carries the death sentence. I believe that isn't just a thing that you throw around. It's absolutely necessary in this case, not just to bring these depraved people to justice, but to send a very loud and clear message to anyone that we will not tolerate these types of heinous crimes against young women in our society. As governor, my name, my signature is the last thing between someone on death row and someone being executed. I would have to sign the death warrant. I take a lot of responsibility. It's a lot, especially as a Christian. But I believe in the case of those men or women implicated in Epstein's crimes, if the evidence is there, if they are charged, if they are convicted by a jury of their peers, I would not just support the death penalty, but the death warrant that I would sign would be for public execution.
Do you suspect that any active politicians were compromised by Epstein?
Yes. And no one is off limits. This investigation that will be done by my special prosecutor will be completely independent of the executive office of the governor. Whoever this prosecutor is will have complete discretion to subpoena Republicans, Democrats, it doesn't matter. I don't care if there's an R or a D next to your name. If you are implicated in those files, Jack, you will be brought to justice when I am governor.
Do you think Trump will pardon Ghislaine Maxwell? I came across an article claiming that she was actively seeking his pardon.
It's tough to know. I sure hope not. You know, the Trump pardon process has been very fascinating because the people that he's pardoned, crypto scammers, arms salesmen, these are not the people that are worthy of the pardon power. The pardon power is for people who have long paid for their crime. And one thing that I think about when staring down the prospect of being elected as the 47th governor of Florida, as the youngest governor in America, and perhaps one day to make my ancestors proud as being the 6th governor in my family, is how I would use pardon power as governor. I make no secret of this. My father served a year and a day in prison in the 80s for a dumb mistake that he made. Didn't hurt anybody, stole some stuff, served a year and a day. My father, since the day he's been released, has carried the weight and the stigma of a felony conviction on his record to the point where I asked my dad, could we go shooting this weekend with Grandpa? And the answer was no, but I never knew really why until I got older, because he would be charged under federal law as a felon in possession of a firearm. When we got turned away from a mortgage application or a rental application, or why my dad had been the most qualified person for the job and been told and offered the job only to be denied after the job offer because he didn't pass the background check because of something that he had done 30 years prior and long served out his sentence, long paid for his crime. One thing that I will do as governor is I will make sure that we restore the rights of every single person in Florida who has already paid for their mistake, because in America, you don't hold someone's worst mistake against them for the rest of your life. And as Christians, we believe in the redeeming power of making a mistake, owning up to it, and then moving on and writing the next chapter of your life. I am ashamed to say that in my state, if you made a mistake 30 years ago and served a year and a day as a felon, it's nearly impossible to vote. You cannot own a firearm. You can still be turned away from job applications that you are perfectly qualified for. You can still be denied a loan for your small business. And so for me, pardon power is in an individual sense, making sure that the right people are actually given that second chance, but in a bigger overarching sense, to make sure that no one is permanently punished for a one-time mistake. And that includes something that's quite controversial even on my side, which is the idea of the Second Amendment right being taken from those with a prior felony conviction. So you do welfare fraud in the 1980s, you serve 3 years in prison, it's 2026, you got 3 kids, you're now moving into a new area for a new job, and the community you're moving into is an under-policed, unsafe, for lack of a better word, ghetto. What do you do? Well, what does any American do? They exercise their God-given, constitutionally protected Second Amendment right. They walk into Bass Pro, they go to a gun show, and they buy a 9mm Glock. If you're a felon, it's a crime to do that. It's a crime to buy a firearm to protect yourself because of a mistake that you made 20, 30, 40 years ago. And so when I say restorative, I mean restoring the rights of every single nonviolent individual in my state with a prior conviction, the right to vote, and the right to defend themselves and their family. I mean, imagine not being able to defend yourself 30 years after you walked out of prison and your own daughters, your own sons were living in fear because you could not defend your family. That is not what our founding fathers had in mind in the summer of 1787 when they put pen to paper and drafted the most important document in American history known as the Constitution.
Yeah, I don't really give much thought to that one. But, I mean, by typical arguments of why we should have guns in the first place, it would make complete sense that felons would have guns because the purpose of a gun isn't anything except the ability to protect yourself, you know?
And I'm a Second Amendment absolutist. And I think I take those 4 words very seriously in the text of the Second Amendment. Shall not be infringed. Well, what about making them wait 3 days? That sounds common sense. They say universal common sense gun law. Make them wait 3 days, Jack. It's cooling off period. Okay, let's play this out. Girlfriend, abusive ex. She's got 2 young boys at home. They just broke up. Boyfriend's now said he's coming over. He's driving 9 hours. She wants to go to the store to be able to defend herself if he comes over and starts a ruckus. She goes to the store. Hey, Second Amendment, not a felon, nothing wrong. Here's my money. Let me take that one. No, ma'am. Come back in 3 days and you can pick it up. There's no reason to tell a young woman who's in fear for her life that she has to wait 72 hours to be able to defend herself and her family. There's no reason for a red flag law to exist. A red flag law is this idea that, remember Tom Cruise Minority Report, you would prevent the crime before it happened. The idea was you could prevent all of these mass shootings or all of these violent incidents if you would call it in beforehand. I'm all for, by the way, if you act a fool and you commit a crime, yeah, let's go arrest you and take your guns because you're being arrested. You don't get to have guns if you're in jail or prison. But the idea was you could call in an anonymous report on your neighbor. The police would go to their door and say, hey, we got this anonymous red flag law petition. And we're going to take your guns. We'll see you in court in 14 days. And then you'll have a hearing. In that hearing, by the way, you do not get a court-appointed attorney. You have to come up with your own money. In the meantime, you are disarmed. And if you don't show up, you lose your Second Amendment rights. Now, what could this infraction be? Well, I'll tell you one actual example that happened in my state of Florida, in Polk County, which is the center of the state. There was a World War II vet who was on the phone with an insurance adjuster. And they're having a dispute about a claim. And he said, if you don't fix this for me, I'm coming down there right now with a bazooka. And this 21-year-old girl on the other line feared that this was Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, thinking that bazookas are readily available, as if this is Afghanistan after Biden led the disastrous withdrawal. Of course, there were bazookas everywhere back then. And she called it in. And so later that day, the police banged on a World War II vet's door and said, red flag law time. We're taking your firearms. We'll see you in court. And he went back and forth in court for 12 months, had to pay $10,000 in attorney's fees, never got a court-appointed lawyer because it doesn't allow for that through this particular civil process. That is not okay. It is not okay to say, my neighbor has an AR-15 and has been posing with his gun on Instagram. And last night, my neighbor at 2 a.m. was listening very, very loudly to Nick Fuentes, and I think he is a danger to others. Please come and take his guns. That is not the America that our founding fathers fought and died for. And it doesn't matter where you are politically. As governor, I will always defend your constitutional rights in my state.
Hey, really fast. Did you guys know that we started this podcast a little over a year ago? And in that time, we've had the chance to sit down with some of the best entrepreneurs in the world. But honestly, these conversations have kind of made me question everything I thought I knew about investing, saving money, or retirement. Growing up, I was taught, put your money in a 401k, get a Roth IRA, and invest in the S&P 500. But what I've realized recently is things are changing fast. Crypto's becoming really mainstream, the S&P barely outpaces inflation, and I'm the guy that was investing in it for the past few years inside of his retirement account. That's why I was so excited when I met the guys at I Trust Capital. They let you invest in gold and cryptocurrency directly in your IRA, which I didn't even know was legal. And if you have an existing Roth or 401k, you can transfer it over for no extra cost. You get all the tax advantages while getting to invest in assets that have way bigger upside and aren't tied directly to the dollar. With just a small 1% transaction fee, you can buy Bitcoin, gold, even Fartcoin with a tax advantage retirement account. I'm currently in the process of transferring my accounts over to their platform, but if you guys want to do the same, go to jackneel.com/itrust. Anyway, back to the podcast. To tie it back a bit to Epstein, and we'll close the loop here on the files in general. Do you think that only the people with the darkest secrets are allowed to run for office? Or do you think this is just something that happen to those who get in positions of power?
It's probably a little bit of both. I think if you're in that position of power, the people that you're around, the trips that you'll go on, the attempts to infiltrate you. Matt Gaetz famously talked about going to Israel and his hotel room being bugged, going to an AIPAC cocktail party, and them quite literally putting QR codes on each member of Congress. As if they were slaves in an auction, you could talk to Matt Gaetz and size him up on how pro-Netanyahu he was, and right there you could scan his barcode and bid on him and give him money and pay him off. And so that world where you draw people in is a world where I think you can corrupt, compromise, and therefore control people. But I also think there is truth to the people who are already compromised, people who already owe the system favors. Well, let's run them. Let's run them for office because we got them right where we want them. If they don't do exactly what we say, we'll release everything we have on them. And so it's a mix of those two. I don't ever want to set false expectations, Jack. I don't ever want to catfish. And I say this as a politician who doesn't have any political experience. I say this as someone who joined Tinder quite literally last month in an attempt to meet young female voters where they are. We got 4,000 matches in 48 hours, Jack, and then they banned us. And my message to young women on Tinder wasn't that I was single and I wanted to go to Blue Bottle and get coffee. My message to them was this: I want to be a governor for you as well, because the Republican Party for far too long has told women how to live their lives, has litigated every single part, wanted women to explain every single decision. I'm pro-life. I believe that life begins at conception. And if I lose the election for being pro-life, for reciting the words of Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5, that before I formed you, I knew you, that before you were born, I set you apart. If I lose the election for being pro-life, I am happy to lose the election. I'm never going to compromise on that issue, but I'm also not going to compromise on this radical belief that's not radical at all, that if you give birth to a beautiful baby boy on Friday night, as a working mom, you should not be expected to show up to work on Monday morning. My hottest take on Tinder, as I guess the pickup line was, as governor, I would institute paid maternity leave for every single working mom in Florida. I believe if you're pro-life, you have to take away the active disincentives that tell young women, now's not a good time to be pregnant. Now's not a good time to be starting a family. And those discussions, those words are uttered every single day, from corporate boardrooms to the water cooler to the back alley of a manufacturing facility. And so my radical belief is put your cards on the table. I think people don't want someone who's going to try to be authentic. You're either authentic or you aren't. You don't try to be. If you're trying to be authentic, you've already lost. And so for me, I think that just being honest with people up front and saying, look, I have zero political experience. I've never met with AIPAC. I've never taken $1 from them. I will never take $1 from them. I will never meet with the kind of lobbyists that have corrupted my state and are selling it off in bits and pieces, trying to pave over parts of the Everglade for the next mass urban construction project, trying to build AI data centers in small towns like Fort Meade and Loxahatchee. There's never a question they'll turn away from voters. I believe that the voters in my state deserve an open book. And when I go out and do 5, 6, 7 different campaign events every single week, I say, at the very end, I say, I'm not here to ask you for your vote. I'm here to ask you to hire me. Don't think of politics as pushing a button on a voting machine. Think of it instead as a choice between two men, Congressman Byron Donalds and myself. And as you're walking into that voting booth on election day, ask yourself, who would I trust more between these two men to wake up every single day and to do whatever it takes to fight for me and my family? That is, I think, the choice that voters are left with. And that's what I'm telling them when I see them on the campaign trail is the polls, certainly we've done well. We've gone from 2% to 23%. We're in second place in a crowded field that includes the lieutenant governor. We're beating him, includes the former speaker of the House. We're beating him. This election probably won't be over until that big Fox News debate on July 21st, where I'll be on stage with Byron Donalds for the first time and have an opportunity to use the same speech and debate skills that you and I honed for years and deliver not just a rebuke of his vision, which is very dark for my state, but also deliver an affirmative vision that fights for the dignity and the wages and the future and the retirement of every single Floridian.
At the beginning of this interview, one of the first things you said was no American should die for Israel. On January 11th, 2026, you went viral writing on a Marine's helmet, no American should die for Israel. 4 weeks later, on February 8th, 2026, someone tried to set your house on fire. Do you think the second event was at all connected to your political views?
Yes. And I've always welcomed disagreement, but trying to burn down my home with my staff in it, to be there as this attempted arson was happening, to have to run out and see the fire department spraying down all of it. It made it real. I mean, you get death threats, you get DMs, you get, we're going to hang you, whatever. But literally to see the charring on a place where I had just walked a couple hours earlier, I didn't feel the full effect of it maybe till a week later, that we're doing something that is bigger than even just Florida. I think there's a theory, a vision for the future of the Republican Party that is on offer with what this movement is about. It's not about one person. It is about one idea that whatever we do, we put America first. When we say America, we don't mean American GDP. We don't mean American companies. We don't mean American foreign policy, strategic interest vis-a-vis the Middle East and the U.S.'s so-called greatest ally, Israel. When we say put America first, we mean put Americans first. We mean waking up and every single policy we look at, regardless of how small or big, we ask ourselves one singular question. Does this benefit American citizens? Yes or no? If that question were applied just as the Pentagon were dispatching the fighter jets to bomb Tehran, does this benefit American citizens? If that simple yes or no binary were asked, those bombs would not have been dropped. This war would not have been started. because what you'll never hear them say is it benefits Americans. What you'll always hear them say is, well, it was a major blow to Iran's strategic influence. What on earth does that mean? It toppled Iran's clout. What on earth does that mean? It reset the chessboard. It dealt them a blow. How does that help us? Not only has this war not helped us, it has hurt the 13 families who've had to bury loved ones. The economic consequences of the war, not just the dollar increase in gas that we're paying, which is $6 every single time we fill up more. But now the Pentagon, Jack, they want $200 billion. Let's play a game, shall we? Remember that game, Would You Rather, in middle school? Would you rather, Jack Neel, spend $200 billion bombing Iran for Israel, or would you rather pay every single qualified teacher in America a $62,000 bonus? Would you rather spend $200 billion to bomb Iran for Israel, or would you rather build 1,300 rural hospitals across America? Would you rather spend $200 billion to bomb Iran for Israel, or give down payment assistance for 20 million families in America so they can buy a home, get married, have children, and live out the full arc of the American dream? Let's make this a contest of competing ideas, of the would you rathers. And when you frame it that way, I think you make the war indefensible. And what you make truly indefensible is how preoccupied, how obsessed, how addicted they are to war, and how utterly apathetic they are to the war in our own communities, the war to fight another day, to pay the rent, to afford groceries, to have kids, to retire with dignity, to get high quality health care at the VA that you've long earned as a veteran fighting in Korea or in Iraq, the war to have a great paying job, to own a home, and to live out the promise of America. If we frame it that way, we will win every single time.
And that money, that's directly from the tax payments that Florida residents make.
Correct.
Got it. So it's not new money. It's not being printed. It's not that kind of thing. I do want to ask, though, I don't consider myself to be the type of individual that says something along the lines of the ends justify the means, but just what is like the ends and the means in the situation to the people making these kinds of decisions? Like, do they expect to get an ROI on this $200 billion? And those other things are just niceties to the everyday person?
Well, a lot of them, there's a revolving door, rather infamously, between the Pentagon and defense contractors. So the $200 billion is being used to buy weapons from the largest defense contractors in America. And so it certainly helps your bargaining power when you leave the Pentagon as the undersecretary of whatever, to then be able to say, hey, I did my part, you do yours. I want to be on the board. I want to be in a vice president of governmental affairs. I want my 500 Gs, I want my private jet, and I want my Amex Black Card. And so there is a quid pro quo to all of it. That's why we have to enact term limits for members of Congress. We have to ban the revolving door that says you're in government one day and then you're working for the very people that you enriched the next, that they are paying back the favor that you gave them. You know, my favorite economist, Thomas Sowell, says, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. I just showed you the incentive for someone in the Pentagon to push for $200 billion to bomb Iran for Israel. Where is the incentive for anyone, Pentagon, Department of Education, Department of anywhere? Where is their incentive to build rural hospitals? Where is their incentive to pay our teachers, firefighters, police officers, paramedics more? Pay them what they're worth. Where is their incentive to tell 20 million young families who are living in a rental that you can now own a home. You can have the picket fence, the front yard, the back yard, the golden retriever. You can go from having 1 kid to 3 or 4. You can have your in-law over maybe for just a weekend or 2. There's no incentive to do that, except because you love your country. But I'm afraid that the people at times who run our government, they just don't not like our country. They, in many respects, hold utter contempt for the United States that you and I love and cherish.
A US-based company, Oracle, recently acquired TikTok from the Chinese. It was owned under ByteDance originally. Do you think America bought TikTok to protect ourselves from Chinese propaganda?
Well, that's what they certainly told us. Why did we buy TikTok, and why did we have Larry Ellison run it? We didn't buy it to stave off Chinese propaganda. We bought it so we could install propaganda of our own. Let me give you just one example. One of the lead executives at TikTok at a conference earlier this year was touting their new censorship policy for hate speech. He said that if a account calls themselves a Zionist, which is to say, generally speaking, someone who is supportive of the Israeli government, the Israeli state, if someone self-identifies as a Zionist, that is approved. But if someone calls you a Zionist, calls me a Zionist, that is banned, that is hate speech. The video that I made at a rally outside of my home the day after it was attempted arson, I came outside with an AR-15, 5.56, and I said, anybody who tries anything like that against our staff, our team, we are not waiting for the police. We will shoot you dead with an AR-15 with a 5.56 round. TikTok took that video down. TikTok will take down videos of young Muslims criticizing the Israeli government, of Christians calling out what happened to the Holy Family Catholic Church in Gaza City last summer. We'll take down videos pointing out the inconsistencies of both Republicans and Democrats who disagree on literally everything, getting millions of dollars from the same organization known as AIPAC. And so, yeah, I think there are probably some genuine concerns about China, TikTok, and that general propaganda arm. But I am way more concerned about TikTok today with Larry Ellison, Oracle, and this pro-Israel bent and this push for censorship. Way more concerned about that than I ever was about TikTok in Chinese hands.
Is it illegal for foreign governments to run propaganda in the US?
It's a good question. It certainly should be. The way that the propaganda is run is through something called FARA, which requires anyone who is enlisted, paid by a foreign government to register with the Department of Justice, to let everybody know, hey, I am a registered agent of Ukraine, of Saudi Arabia, or of Israel. And there's clear limitations about what you can do. And there's, again, public disclosure there. The issue, though, is that if you're taking $500,000, $1 million from AIPAC, you are not required to put that on your website. You're not required to disclose that to the voters who voted you in, Republican or Democrat, to put their interests first. And so what I think we have to do more than anything is we have to ban this kind of foreign money. In principle, yes, it is illegal because it violates the social contract between the government and her people. We can't possibly think that China would let us go pay off their politicians in the Politburo or the Standing Committee of the CCP, nor should we. But why is it allowed the other way around? And so my radical idea is we have to get AIPAC out of US politics. The way you do that is not just by changing the laws at the top level, but we as voters, you in California, me in Florida, saying, I don't care what they say, what they try to dangle in front of us, under no circumstance can you vote for someone who has taken a penny from AIPAC. If we go through 1 or 2 cycles of just not voting for the AIPAC-backed candidates, the system will flush itself out. And then in 8 years, we'll have a really good thing that we can be proud of.
Are you alone in that ideology?
I'm not.
Who else shares it?
Quite a few people. on the right, of course, but also on the left. In fact, I think a lot of the skepticism about this recent wave of what Israel has done in Gaza has actually come from a lot of the Democrats that I would find myself disagreeing with on a lot of things in recent years. You know, I was never some pro-Israel advocate. I kind of was a card-carrying member of the, Israel is an ally and, they're the only democracy in the Middle East and they're fighting the bad guys so we don't have to. Similar line was used against Russia with Ukraine. Ukraine is fighting the bad guys so we don't have to, as if Ukraine didn't exist as a buffer, Russia would be attacking us in New York City or in Miami, which of course is not true. But I've got to give credit because I truly wasn't aware of how bad things had gotten. I was largely indifferent to what was happening in Gaza and the Middle East until, rather selfishly, the Catholic Church, the Holy Family Catholic Church in Gaza City was bombed last summer, and there was no real investigation, no real accountability. Netanyahu brushed it off when there were people during a mass, the same mass that I go to every single Sunday with my team, was bombed by the IDF. And that's when I really, it was like an old Hemingway quote, how did you go bankrupt gradually then suddenly? How did you wake up to what Israel was really doing in the Middle East gradually then suddenly? And for me, that was the suddenly. It also hit home when I saw free speech being attacked in Florida. The new anti-Semitism law that came about in 2023 that said that even criticism of the Israeli government could now become a punishable offense. Florida State Statute 10105 adopts the IHRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Agency's definition of anti-Semitism. Now again, hatred of Jews is wrong, but criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitism. And so if you are the Students for Justice in Palestine at UF and you are criticizing the Israeli government and protesting against human rights violations in Gaza or on the West Bank, you have a First Amendment right to do so. Just as if you're a conservative going to a school board meeting protesting a vaccine mandate or left-wing indoctrination in the schools. You have a First Amendment right to do so. This hit home because they say, oh, well, what is the police going to come knock on your door about this? And quite literally this happened in January. A woman by the name of Raquel Pacheco's, 15-year resident of Miami Beach, 9-year veteran of the National Guard, committed the capital offense of criticizing the mayor of being too pro-Israel, criticizing him on Facebook. And the mayor of Miami Beach sent the Miami Beach Police Department to go confront her. And the entire encounter is on camera. They just filed a First Amendment lawsuit in federal court this past week. And he admitted to it, never denied it, and said we had to do it because of the rise in, quote, anti-Semitism.
So you can literally go to jail for anti-Semitism, criticism of Israel, or criticism of AIPAC?
Yes.
Did she go to jail?
She didn't. She's lucky because there was a huge firestorm that broke out. And now she has to go to court. She has to sue them to finally make this clear. This kind of oppressive censorship can never be allowed anywhere in America, but least of all in the so-called free state of Florida. As a conservative, I don't want the college Republicans of UF to be banned for so-called anti-Semitism, which they were 2 weeks ago. And I'm glad that my friend Anthony Sabatini, a lawyer from Central Florida, has taken up the case, is now suing them in federal court. I am filing an amicus brief defending not just their First Amendment right, but the First Amendment right of any student group to bring on any speaker to say anything that is protected by the U.S. Constitution. There are two forms of speech that are not protected by the U.S. Constitution. The first is a truth threat. That's me texting you later, Jack, fun interview, but I'm coming over to kill you. That's not protected by the First Amendment. Or it is, I see you across the street in downtown Miami, and I say, hey guys, that's Jack Neel. Let's go get him. Let's lynch him. That would fail the Bradenburg test from Bradenburg v. Ohio, 1969, U.S. Supreme Court, that said that speech that incites imminent lawless action, violence, is not protected by the U.S. Constitution. Everything else is fair game, including being racist, by the way. Things that I find abhorrent, offensive, they're still protected by the First Amendment. And so, again, let's go back to that two truths. Two things can be true. Calling for the death of any race, of any religion, the destruction of, that is wrong. But it is not criminal. Criticizing your own government, I may disagree with those criticisms, but it is not criminal. And so what I think we have to do, and I don't like saying this because I think the Democrats really weaponized it in 2024. They told us that democracy itself was on the ballot in the 24 election between Trump and Kamala Harris. That was a cop-out. If you want to criticize Trump and criticize the involvement and the war and economic policy, fine. But to make it this existential fight about democracy and that if Trump wins, that's democracy as we know it is over, that is a very cheap argument that wouldn't pass muster at one of our local speech and debate tournaments, let alone on a national political stage. What I think you're better off doing is just attacking the substantive issues, the real issues. With that being said, I do think that the First Amendment is on the ballot in my race. My opponent, Congressman Byron Donalds, has said nothing about what happened to Raquel Pacheco, has said nothing about what happened to the UF College Republicans, has said nothing about what happened to the Students for Justice in Palestine who were kicked off the University of Florida, which is a public university, which is taxpayer funded, which is bound by the First Amendment. This is not a private business. It's a public university that is censoring students simply because it disagrees with their speech. You disagree with me all you want. I'm never going to throw you off campus. I'm never going to threaten you with criminal prosecution. I'm never going to send the police to bang on your door because I believe that disagreement, that debate makes us better Americans at the end of the day.
What do you make of the Florida nightclub incident? I believe this was 2 months ago. Essentially, Andrew Tate, Tristan Tate, Justin Waller, Myron Gaines co-host, Clavicular, and Sneeko were at a nightclub in Miami. Allegedly, someone had played a song. It was a song called HH by Kanye. And I think they had gotten banned from all the clubs within South Florida or that area. And there was a whole media press release about this, and many people saw it as anti-Semitic. But I want to know your thoughts on the incident.
Well, I'll tell you, it is not my favorite Kanye West song. That is reserved for Flashing Lights. I like a lot. I like Love Lockdown from 808s. I think that was the best album. I've been listening a lot to Life of Pablo. So it would be not anywhere near my favorite Kanye song. In fact, quite seriously, I think the song is pretty offensive and I don't think it should be played publicly. At the same time, the two truths, that song is deeply offensive. It also should not have started literally World War III, to where government officials were telling people like Sneeko, Clavicular, and Nick Fuentes that they were no longer allowed in Miami Beach. And clearly private businesses had gotten the memo. Look, a private business can turn anyone away. The real test is if you owned a restaurant and you were critical of Israel, you would want to retain the right to deny Benjamin Netanyahu service. If you were critical of China, you would want to deny the right of Chairman Xi Jinping from having noodles at your restaurant. So we agree, I think, that private businesses should be able to deny patrons, certainly not because of their race or their religion. You can't deny someone because they're white or because they're Christian. But if it is not a protected class, then yes, of course. But what it awfully looks like here is actually the government precipitating this action and saying, we didn't like this song. Therefore, all businesses in Miami Beach were telling you, these guys are not allowed. You should pass the word, whether you're a restaurant, a club, a coffee, whatever, these guys are not allowed. Now, if those businesses had come to that conclusion on their own, it would be legally protected. I'm still not the biggest fan of it because I think playing a stupid song doesn't mean you get banned for life from everywhere, but that's still their right. But what it really looks like is this was government instituted. The government made the call, the businesses picked up, and therefore it was government action disguised as businesses making their own organic decision. And so again, I come back to it. Two truths. It's a really messed up song. I'm not a fan of it. At the same time, I'm not a fan of government action telling private businesses that, and you don't have to like Nick Fuentes, you don't have to agree with him on nearly anything, but I will always protect his free speech rights and every American's free speech rights, especially those who want to criticize Nick Fuentes. If you want to criticize him, be my guest. The beauty of America is that we compete in the open marketplace, that we don't settle our differences with violence, but through free speech and open debate.
I have a fun segment for you. You can just describe the following people with one word. Ron DeSantis.
Brave.
Donald Trump.
Funny.
Byron Donalds.
Slave.
Sam Altman.
Cunning.
Nick Fuentes.
Smart.
Clavicular.
Mog.
Epstein.
Depraved.
Bibi Netanyahu.
Criminal.
Charlie Kirk.
Patriot.
Erica Kirk.
Deceitful.
JD Vance.
Duplicitous.
Gavin Newsom.
Disastrous.
Do you think Gavin Newsom has done a good job here in California?
I've been to California probably 6 times my entire life. My grandparents had a place out here in San Francisco where they would spend the summers to get away from the crazy heat of South Florida. And so I would often visit them and spend time. And I can tell you from what they saw, Gavin Newsom has been an utter disaster. What I can objectively look at is that people will always vote with their feet. And you had the number 1 state for U-Haul rentals leaving the state in recorded history. That tells you something about the living conditions here. I think this is a beautiful state, by the way. Absolutely beautiful. Second only to Florida, of course. But there's something about squandering that beauty, letting that all go to waste for political social experiments. Remember, it was the same Gavin Newsom that had told you you couldn't see your loved one because of COVID, but was also eating at the most expensive restaurant on the West Coast at French Laundry. This is the same Gavin Newsom who said, you must wear a mask everywhere you go, even though he was maskless chanting with BLM supporters who were rioting in the streets of LA, Sacramento, and Oakland. This is the same Gavin Newsom who said it is okay to talk to young children about sensitive sexual topics in the classroom. And so I don't view the Gavin Newsom problem as Republican or Democrat, even as left versus right. I view it as right versus wrong. It is wrong to do one thing and to tell your people to do another. It is wrong to tell people that they should not do the very thing that you are going out of your way to do. And so I think history will look at Gavin Newsom and will try to diagnose exactly what his tenure was most responsible for. But I think the way to measure the failure of Gavin Newsom's administration is how many people have just left the state and have gone for greener pastures. And one of those pastures has been Florida.
Quick question. How many different apps, software subscriptions are you using to run your business? Because if you're anything like me, you're probably doing email marketing on one platform, you built your website on another platform, and calendar appointments, CRM somewhere else. You're paying hundreds, thousands of dollars a month on all these tools, and you can barely keep track of anything. And that's why my team started using High Level. It's basically an operating system for our entire business all in one place. You can keep track of leads, send automated emails and text, build landing pages, and process payments all in one platform, $97 a month. So if you want to stop paying for 8 different subscriptions, just go to jackneel.com/highlevel or scan the QR code on screen. You can also hit the first link in the description, but again, that is jackneel.com/highlevel if you want to run your entire business all in one place. But anyway, guys, back to the podcast. I want to touch on why Florida is such an important state like domestically as far as the entire US goes, and why you being elected governor and your policies would have impacts around the US and potentially around the globe. But first, one of the things that people often reference with you is your opinions on OnlyFans. The CEO of OnlyFans died of cancer a few days ago at 43 years old. Do you want Elon Musk to buy OnlyFans and shut it down?
That's one way to handle it. I think OnlyFans is a cancer on society, but in particular on young women. When I was growing up, young women, including my sister, they aspired to be nurses, lawyers, teachers. My sister is now a proud public school teacher. They aspired to be stay-at-home moms, to run small businesses, to be veterinarians. Now, young women, their top career choice, if you ask them in national surveys, is to be an influencer, and among that, an OnlyFans content creator. Now, are there women on OnlyFans who will do it no matter what? Of course. But what is most frustrating about all of this is there are good women in my state and all over this country who are turning to OnlyFans because they feel like they have no other choice. They're struggling with the rent, affording groceries. They might want to put down the down payment on a mortgage. They're college students and they're struggling to pay for tuition or textbooks this semester. And so instead of being able to do something worthwhile and dignified, they've been sold the lie that it's just easy. Go on OnlyFans, take your cut, take some photos of yourself nude, then some videos, then bring in another person and then another person, create an entire library of explicit content that commodifies you, that reduces you to simply an object of men, that financializes you into a product and strips you of your humanity and your dignity. I was attacked by Sophie Rain because she said I wasn't pro-women. With all due respect to Sophie, the pro-women thing to do is to help women be the best versions of themselves, because I believe that young women, including Sophie Rain, are capable of anything they put their minds to. But no woman should feel trapped in the world of online sex work. No woman should feel as if they can't do anything more worthwhile. And so if you're a mom in Florida and you're struggling and you feel like OnlyFans is the answer, I want you to know I'm not going to mock you. I'm not going to ask you to explain the last 15 years of your life. I'm going to meet you where you are and make sure you have the support that you need to write the next chapter of your life. If you're a college student and you're struggling to pay tuition for the next semester, know that I will be a governor for you to get you off of OnlyFans, to make sure you can write the next chapter of your life. But if you, as Sophie Rain has adamantly said, if you insist on selling your body on the internet, when we have removed the barriers elsewhere for you to make an honest, dignified living, if you insist putting out online degenerate content that doesn't just harm you, it also harms young men. It draws them into lust. It fuels this pornographic addiction that young men are grappling with, which is also at the heart of the crisis that young men are facing these days. If you are part of that systemic rot, you have two choices. Quit OnlyFans or pay your taxes. It's going to be a 50% OnlyFans sin tax. Any income that is derived from OnlyFans is going to have a 50% tax. That means, Jack, that Sophie Rain is nearing $42 million in taxes that she will owe the state of Florida. I don't want to raise $1 in tax revenue if we can help it. I would much rather create the OnlyFans sin tax and scare everybody out of OnlyFans so we don't raise that money. But if we do raise that money, we're going to use it to raise teacher pay and to increase empowerment programs for young men and women so they don't have to turn to online degeneracy, they don't get addicted to online pornography, but they can be the best versions of themselves.
So you think women should pay a sin tax for doing OnlyFans?
Yes.
And sin taxes traditionally are for goods like alcohol, cigarettes, nicotine, right?
Yes.
And is it typically the people selling those things that are paying the sin taxes to the government, or is it the consumer of the products?
It's usually the consumer of the product. The sin tax, though, can be applied to the supplier of the product. And I wouldn't take it off the table that The sin tax could also be applied to the young man, for example, who's buying the content from Sophie Rain on a monthly subscription. So everything is on the table to tackle this problem of online degeneracy. Even people who disagree with me on this, you ask them point blank about OnlyFans. Don't ask them if they support OnlyFans or whatever, and they'll give you some free speech argument. Ask them this. If the number of women doing OnlyFans doubled tomorrow, would that be a sign of a healthy society? Yes or no? Even Sophie Rain herself, I think, would be hard-pressed to argue that if the number of women on OnlyFans doubled tomorrow, the number of 19, 20, 21-year-old girls who aspired to be veterinarians, florists, small business owners, doctors, lawyers, teachers, if that number doubled, it meant that women gave up on their dreams. It meant that women were being sold a lie, were being objectified, commodified in many respects, and I don't say this lightly, were being enslaved to an online world of degeneracy. The pro-woman thing to do is to stand up to the owners of OnlyFans, tell them to get the hell out of our state, tell them go bankrupt so we can stand up for the dignity of every single young lady in our state.
So if you become governor of Florida, how much would Sophie Rain be taxed for doing OnlyFans?
At this rate, about $42 million she would owe.
And one would assume that she would just leave the state.
Fine by me. That's the case, then we're going to start taxing the consumer. We will do whatever it takes, Jack, to end the online degeneracy, the filth that is OnlyFans. We will do whatever it takes, and trust me, it will work.
Research from Pew estimates there are about 14 million people living in the U.S. illegally, with a recent Yale study estimating this could be as high as 23 million. As the child of a parent that had immigrated to the U.S., do you think America should deport 20 million illegal immigrants?
So you're right. My mother was born in South America, a small town called Barranca Bermeja in Colombia. Very hot. It is called the oven of Colombia. It is brutal there. I spent the summers there for much of my childhood and got a chance to see my family, my grandmother, my abuelita, that I talk to almost every single day. America is not a nation of immigrants. We are a nation of pioneers and settlers. It doesn't change the fact, though, that immigrants have been a part of our national story, that innovation, cultural enrichment, food, entertainment has been indelibly impacted by the work of immigrants. But the immigrants of the 1850s, the immigrants of the 1950s are not the immigrants of the 2020s. The immigrants who stormed the border when Kamala Harris was the border czar were not the same immigrants who came to Ellis Island in search for a new place, who were committed to the words of our 26th president, Teddy Roosevelt, when he said, we have but one flag, the American flag. We have but one language, the English language. We don't have any room for hyphenated Americans. We only have room for people who will make this country their sole loyalty. And the immigrants who came to Ellis Island, they did not get food stamps, Obama phone. They did not get $7,000 a month. They did not get a $500 a night hotel room. They did not get a Gavin Newsom gift card to go to Erewhon. They pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. They assimilated. They spoke the language. They committed themselves fully, unwaveringly, and undyingly to the United States of our founding fathers. That is very different than the immigrants who came here 5 years ago under Joe Biden. And so my view has always been, if your first act of entering our country was to break our law, whether that was storming the border or even overstaying your visa, you have to go back, because we are a nation of laws, and any job that is taken by someone who is not here lawfully is a job that could go to an American citizen. There's this lie that's often told that Americans don't want to do these jobs. It's a lie, but it's also a half-truth, because Americans don't want to do these jobs, but finish the sentence. Americans don't want to do these jobs at the slave wages that American billionaires are willing to pay American workers. The people of my state, you pay them an honest wage for an honest day's work, they will show up every single day, but they will take off on Sunday to praise our awesome God. And so we need to get back to a system that restores the Christian ethic of capitalism, that doesn't say that capitalism is about maximizing profits. Because if capitalism, Jack, is about maximizing profits and getting the highest labor margins we can, and it's all about the bottom line, if that's what capitalism is about, we should bring back slavery because that was really cheap labor. And yet we don't, because we realize that some things are so morally offensive, repugnant, abhorrent, that they supersede the capitalistic impulse to maximize profits. And so my view has always been, we can't go around in 10 years from now and say, well, I'm really proud of our country because we have the freest, most capitalist system. We know the fruits of our system because of high profit margins, stock market, GDP. All of those things can be true. But if people are living in poverty, if you're a young man and you're not married by the age of 30 and you can't buy a home by the age of 30, if you can't get a job even though you're fully qualified for it, whatever the field is, if your home is being auctioned off to Blackstone, hoarded, and turned into a rental community, and you can't even engage in the promise of home ownership, it doesn't matter what gross domestic product is. It doesn't matter what the stock market says. The American dream is no longer a reality for you. And so I want to get back to a country where we don't worship any particular economic ideology. We recognize that capitalism is a good system. It is perhaps the best system, but it is not a perfect system. And I believe that capitalism rooted in that Christian ethic is the way forward.
Assuming that some major worldly event causes America to suffer devastating economic downfall, do you think it'd be reasonable to assume we would see a large number of immigrants come into the country illegally for cheap labor purposes? And with that, what is the actual statute or legislation that needs to change to stop the current issue of illegal immigrants?
It's already illegal. What we have to do is better enforce it. It's illegal to shoplift in California. The problem is no one enforces the law. Even if the police here in LA arrest someone, the prosecutor will decline to press charges, or the Soros-funded judge will decline to hear the case. We'll let the person go. We'll dismiss it. It's illegal to burn down police stations in the name of George Floyd in the summer of 2020, but no one was arrested. It's illegal to shoot people on the streets of Chicago, young black men and women, but no one seems to be arrested for it. So the question isn't whether the letter of the law says it's illegal. It's whether the enforcer in chief is actually prosecuting these offenses. And as governor, I would prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law. What that means is not just going and taking someone who has a felony warrant out for their arrest, who's an illegal immigrant, and sending them back to their home country. That also means going to the billionaires who run the largest agricultural companies in our state and saying, it's over. It's done. You made your money. 30 years ago, you managed to do all of this without exploiting illegal labor from the third world. You can do it again. But your profit margin days of maximizing at the expense of not just our workers, Jack, but of these migrants as well. I am not of the opinion that every single migrant in our country is some incorrigible criminal. It doesn't change the fact that I believe they need to be resettled back home and they need to be remigrated back to their home country. But the 15-year-old boy that the New York Times profiled in 2022 in an article titled "The Kids on the Midnight Shift," he lost his arm illegally working at a meat processing facility in the Midwest. His employer and the billionaires who own that company knew exactly what they were doing when they were taking young men like him, trafficking them into the country, paying them under the table as children to work the midnight shift. And so we can dispel with the notion that this only exploits American workers. It does, because it dispossesses them of a job, of benefits, of an income, of the life that comes with that income and that financial self-sufficiency, but it also exploits third world migrant labor. And there was a time and place where the Democratic Party once recognized that a period where you bring people over from another country and you exploit them for illegal labor We fought a war over that. That is wrong then. It is wrong now. And I wish that we can get back to a party where the Democrats in leadership will get on the same page with Republicans and say, we don't want illegal labor to benefit anyone, not least because it hurts American workers and it hurts the migrants. Now, look, the guy who killed Laken Riley, the sicko that killed Rachel Marin, the depraved criminal who took the life of Jocelyn Nagari, these people are incorrigible and they need to be put to death. But most immigrants in America left their home because they wanted to escape poverty. That doesn't make it okay, but it just makes it a sober, rational recognition of what actually went wrong. I have the belief that you should stay where God put you, that God didn't make a mistake when you were born in Senegal or Nigeria or Guatemala or Colombia or Venezuela, that you were there for a reason. You should fight for your wife, your kids, your mom, as much as it might hurt your mother-in-law. Fight for your community, make your country great. Because right now we can't make our country great when young men cannot get a job because the largest companies in America are relying on cheap third world illegal labor, and that is preventing them from hiring good men, white or black, it doesn't matter. Those jobs should go to us. That income allows us to buy a home. That home allows us to get married. That marriage allows us to have children. That children allows us to live a life of purpose.
If you had to tie one core cause to the wealth disparity happening between classes in the U.S., would it be the illegal labor issue?
Yes and no. Statistically, it is the most pervasive form of disparity. But if you just look at raw balance sheet, raw net worth, the biggest is going to be who owns the assets, who borrows money, who lends money, and who is on the other end, which say they rent, they don't own stocks. Stock market goes up, annualized 12% a year, 20, 30 years straight. That's going to create a pretty massive disparity.
Right.
I believe that the Republican Party is wrong for not acknowledging what you and I and almost everybody at home knows to be true, that income inequality is real. It is a problem. The working families where I grew up in Davie, where I went to church in Pahokee, one of the poorest towns in Florida, where my dad often bought watermelons by the hundreds to sell on the side of the road in Fort Lauderdale, a small migrant community, farming community in Immokalee. Those poor people, they don't wake up and say, Mark Zuckerberg, you're the reason I'm poor. They don't look at Bill Gates or Elon Musk and say, man, I'm screwed because of how much money they have. In fact, they're willing to celebrate that success because where they came from, rich men who had done productive things would often be dispossessed of their wealth in the name of democratic socialism. But I think there is truth to the fact that if you can barely afford your basic necessities, if you can not get a job, not be able to buy a home because the system isn't working for you, that's the problem. The people that I meet in my state and rural communities and working class communities, they don't aspire to be Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk. They just want to live a life that they can afford and a life that they can be proud of. They want to keep their head above water. And no, Elon Musk's worth does not need to be nationalized by the government to make that happen. We have to remove barriers that make it hard to start small businesses. We need to create a labor market that actually prioritizes American citizens, not unqualified foreign labor, whether that's illegally sourced or even legally sourced via programs like the H-1B scam. And we have to make sure that there are real benefits and that wages keep up with inflation. You know, if the prices doubled over the next 5 years, you and I would be pissed. Everyone would be pissed if the prices doubled in the economy. But if the prices doubled and our salaries, our wages, our take-home pay tripled, we'd have nothing to be upset about. It's not just, Jack, that prices have gone up. It's that prices have gone up and our take-home pay has not kept up the pace. And so an economic system that fights inflation is one that works to keep prices from going up quickly, but also makes sure that we can work so that that take-home pay is at the very minimum keeping up with inflation, but in many respects outpacing it. You can't do that when you import 10 million foreign workers who are willing to work for $2 a day, who will never join a union, who will never demand working conditions, who will allow themselves, sadly, because of the system, to be exploited. That holds down wages for everyone else. You come out of high school, you say, I'm ready to get into the world of agriculture. I'm ready to move to Okeechobee County or Highlands County in the Florida heartland. I'm ready to do this work. And just use a physical example. You show up at a farm, and just as you're about to sign your employment contract, a busload of foreign workers, of migrants from Central America is dropped off. And what you were going to get $20 an hour for, that same hour of work they're willing to do for $3, for $4, because of the disparity between what they earned at home, their living conditions here, the ability to send money back home. And what does that business owner do? Hold up, Jack. We're not hiring your kind anymore. We'll take a couple of those guys. We'll take 10 of those guys at $2 an hour versus one of you for $20 an hour. And that is the system we've set up. Now, as much as I'd love business owners to come to the patriotic realization that you have to owe your allegiance to your country and her people as opposed to foreigners who got here on a bus 5 minutes ago, that realization, that epiphany is not going to be organic. I believe that it's government's responsibility to correct this wrong. And in many respects, a free market is one that also plays by the rules. The free market that Milton Friedman rightly defended is not one that would import cheap foreign labor and allow it to underprice good American workers. And so I think that's government's responsibility. That's one thing that I'll do as governor, is not just stand up to illegal labor, but also stand up to the billionaires that are exploiting illegal labor at the expense of hardworking people throughout Florida. And my hope is that we create a blueprint that any state, even California, can Command C, Command V, can copy and paste, take that blueprint and successfully apply it in the other 49 states.
Would you regulate remote labor?
I would in foreign countries. I'll give you one example. There's a La Quinta hotel not too far from the Miami International Airport. And you go in there to check in, put your credit card down, and there's an Indian from India, not from the Cherokee tribe. There's an Indian there, but he's not really there. It's an iPad. He's on Zoom. This is actually the case. I posted a video of this earlier this year. There's an Indian there checking you in at the La Quinta Hotel. That used to be a job that would go to a young black girl from Miami Gardens or from Belle Glade or from Liberty City. That was going to be her first job. She wasn't going to make a lot of money. She knew that. She had no illusions about making $30, $40 an hour, but she wanted some place to start, to build a little bit of experience, to build up her resume, to then have the knowledge to get the next job. It wasn't about what she was necessarily going to earn. It was also about what she was going to learn. That job, that income, those skills, that learning and earning has now been stolen from her and given to a fine Indian fellow in Mumbai or in Calcutta. That is not okay. And once again, we're letting billionaires in large companies prioritize their profit margins, their bottom line. It is much cheaper to hire an Indian on an iPad than a young black girl from Miami Gardens to work at that hotel. But now that young girl doesn't have a job, doesn't have income, will live at home 5 years longer, won't be able to have a real relationship, won't be able to have children until later life or even at all. Her ability to buy a home taken, her skills squandered, her destiny dispossessed. What are we doing here? Thomas Sowell quote, again, my favorite economist. Politics is not about solutions. It's about trade-offs. Here's the trade-off. I'm not going to make everyone happy with this. Certainly not the owners of La Quinta and their shareholders. But here's the trade-off. 20-year-olds who are smart and qualified can't get jobs, or La Quinta cannot maximize its third quarter profits. What trade-off are you willing to sleep with at night more? I'm asking companies to do the right thing, to look at the big picture. By the way, forget the moral, ethical, patriotic be loyal to your country and her people argument for a moment, which would obviously favor hiring local kids who are qualified to do these jobs. Jack, are you inclined to check into a hotel where you're going to meet an Indian man with a strong accent over a FaceTime call? Is that the kind of customer service that you're going to come to expect and enjoy?
Better than AI, I suppose.
But not as good as having a breathing human who speaks your language from your community, who you can go down to in the middle of the night and say, hey, I'm locked out. Or, hey, I need a good coffee to go to in the morning. Hey, what can you recommend as a cool family-friendly attraction for this evening? So it's the morally right thing to do, the ethically right thing to do, the patriotic thing to do. It also happens to be the right business thing to do. Because in the long run, there's nothing attractive about having a hotel, having waiters, having people remotely zoom in and check you in, take your order, or wine and dine you. That's not okay. And so what I would tell those businesses is, hey guys, I'm a business guy too. I'm an investor. My investment firm has already deployed $40 million of capital last year alone, investing in companies all over this country. I get it. I'm not asking you to do something that's going to hurt your bottom line. I'm asking you to do the thing that's going to help the country, help your community, and is also going to help you maximize your bottom line in the long term. In the long term, you are not going to have repeat customers if you force them to check in and get customer service and concierge over an iPad with an Indian fellow who I'm sure is a good guy who just wants to feed his family, but so do we. We want to be able to feed our families. The right thing to do is to put American workers first. And so when you're a governor, you got to pass laws, you got to work with the legislator, you got to compromise. But one thing that's often underrated that I'm having an appreciation for is you've also got to be a good negotiator, a good communicator. You have to be the person who can pick up the phone and tell the 10 largest hotels in Florida, here's why we all need to be on the same page and get this done. I need to be able to sell them, to persuade them. I don't want them kicking and screaming. If they have to, so be it. But that's the last resort. My grandmother always reminded me, you're always going to attract more bees with honey than with vinegar. And so I'm going to speak softly and carry a big stick, but I'd rather that stick be one of carrots that I can offer them, to work with them, to do the right thing for our country, our workers, and ultimately, if we look past next quarter or next fiscal year, the right thing for their company and their shareholders.
This leads into a really important question that a lot of people are fearful of. If you were elected governor of Florida, how would you prevent AI from taking everyone's jobs?
It's a really good question. I use AI almost every single day to do research, to edit videos, our team uses it all the time. I don't think, and I grew up in the age of dial-up. I grew up in the age of the Nintendo 64 and then seeing the GameCube and the PS2 become the PS3 and then broadband internet. I remember waiting in line with my family as they got the first iPhone in 2007. And so I grew up at a really interesting time. You're a couple years younger than me, but we grew up at really interesting inflection points in technological progress. More has happened in technology in the last 30 years than perhaps the last 300 for consumer-facing tech. One, I think the fears over AI are overblown for a couple reasons. But the first is I think AI has actually become less advanced in the last 6 months, last year, for whatever reason. And there's some very interesting technical constraints behind the scenes with inference and training. AI, it looks like it's actually gotten dumber. And so one of the preconditions for AI taking everyone's job is that AI is smarter than everyone. I would have actually subscribed to that thesis 12 months ago, but my own research, some of the academic papers that I'm reading about scaling and inference suggest that AI is probably capped out in the near term here. The kind of jobs that AI, if it is in fact more advanced than humans, will take are the kind of jobs that are in many respects a weight on society. So a paralegal. Now, the paralegals will not like that the paralegals are being replaced, but that is a cost that is being borne in a society where you have to pay out for legal expenses. So when AI comes in, what does that allow you as a average American to do? It allows you to take the fight to courts where you weren't able to do before. If you wanted to sue somebody, $10,000 for a lawyer, take them to court, 18 months, you may not lose, whatever. With AI, you can draft a lawsuit, you can file it yourself, pro se, it can take you step by step. So on one hand, that is a loss for the 1 out of 1,000 people who are paralegals, who are going to be able to move on to a new career, a more fulfilling career. They're smart people. But it's also a gain for the other 999 people who are now able to use this technology to hold companies that abuse them or break their contract, hold them accountable in a way they never were before. I'm really excited about law in particular because I think this is a new era where even at this stage, even if you assume no further technological progress, AI in the field of law has gotten very advanced where everyday people can file lawsuits and hold people accountable in the court system. And one of the things about, the law is that, yeah, Walmart could probably beat the average Floridian or the average American in a lawsuit if it went all the way to trial. But even the act of threatening to sue them and then following it up with a lawsuit, 80% of the time, they're just going to settle at that point. And there's something really cool about giving that power, as cliche as it sounds, giving that power back to the people, kind of calling their bluff and saying, you know what? All right, you're not going to make this right. You screwed up my hotel for 4 days. You broke my contract on the chain link fence. You didn't fill my potholes. Okay, well, we're going to sue you. 20 years ago, that was usually growing up as a kid, if you said someone was going to sue somebody, they laugh. And my dad cut trees for 20 years. If he got $1 for every single time he said someone was going to sue him for something, we wouldn't have been eating Lunchables as often as we were as kids. And so now you actually can hold, not my dad, but you can hold people accountable for breaking their contracts or whatever the case is. So that's a net benefit, right? If you look at it not as just the losers, but as the winners, I think you'll find that generally speaking, technological advancement has been largely beneficial. Now, is that to say that doom scrolling is good for society? No. But what I think AI can liberate for a lot of people is creating individual education plans for students. It's going to be a new renaissance for homeschool parents, creating interactive activities, games that are custom to each individual students. Growing up, my sister liked to play SimCity. I like to play Call of Duty. Imagine creating a game that could teach exponents or logarithmics or whatever through the lens of SimCity, or even, dare I say, Call of Duty 4 on my PC. That's pretty freaking cool. And you could not fathom creating custom internet games without AI or without anything 5 or 10 years ago. And so something really cool about that, about individual education, about bringing AI into the world of medicine. I can't tell you how many times my dad went to a doctor and complained about the same pain, 5 different doctors over 5 different months, and was told, go home, sleep on it, go home, sleep on it, take some Tylenol. And now is able in a matter of minutes to self-diagnose some pain with AI and actually hold doctors accountable. We need that. We need that check and balance. And so I'm always going to be in favor of spreading that knowledge and giving more agency and power to everyday people. There have to be restraints on that. You obviously can't have chatbots telling kids to harm themselves or even take their own lives. We need an AI Bill of Rights that says if you're under the age of 18, any parent has a right to access those chat logs. There have to be real guardrails there. But I'm never going to be in favor of having to present your ID to go on the internet. There's these new age verification laws for social media. It's rather interesting that at a time when Gen Z seems to be turning decisively to the right, that all of a sudden global governments want to throttle Gen Z's ability and the next generation's ability to go online because heaven forbid they'll see something from Nick Fuentes that they agree with or whomever. And I think that's what very much age verification laws are trying to do, is they're trying to throttle Gen Z. I'll tell you, Gen Z doesn't get enough credit. They are very politically conscious about what's going on. I meet Gen Z voters every single day on the campaign trail, and they have a real pulse for what's happening in the country, a real appreciation for the historical moment that we're in. And that's not because of the textbooks in school. That's not because of AP World History. That is because of YouTube, of TikTok, of Kick, of Rumble, of a lot of the podcasters on the left and the right who are really waking people up. And there are people out there who I know who watch Hassan Piker, who also watch Nick Fuentes. People who listen to Pod Save America and will also listen to Tucker Carlson. I'm one of those people. I listen to all of those things. I don't find much joy in watching Fox News. I actually want to watch the other side so I can know what my blinders are. I want to hear what the other side is saying, in large part because I don't believe that one side has a monopoly on truth. It was the Republicans pushing the lie of the Iraq War. It was the Democrats pushing the lie of COVID. And now it's the Republicans pushing the lie of Iran is going to drop a nuke on us in the next week unless we bomb them and bomb a school full of children and unless we lose 13 service members. And so I'm not buying any of that. That truth is only possible, not in an echo chamber, but in a radically open internet that allows every voice to come in. And if you're pushing age verification, you are by definition making it harder to access that internet, and that is good for no one.
James, you're 31. You've been called a fraud, an extremist, a national threat. Someone even tried to set your house on fire. When you consider what all this is costing you, why does it feel worth it to run for governor of Florida?
For me, it's worth it because I couldn't live with the regret of not doing this. I couldn't live with the regret of wondering what things would have looked like had I not taken this risk. We've upset a lot of people. To the Wall Street Journal this week, who labeled me an extremist, if putting America first makes me an extremist, I am guilty as charged. If saying that we should have paid maternity leave for working moms in America makes me a radical, I am guilty as charged. If saying that no American should die for Israel makes me a nationalist, I am guilty as charged. And so I apply that regret minimization framework that if I was staring down this decision in November and I said, what would I regret more? Like losing my career, some friends, professional networking opportunities, cocktail party invitations. Would I regret losing that more? Or would I regret losing the ability to tell the truth? And I will not tell a lie on this campaign, even if it means me winning the election. I think that truths, especially those that are controversial, even the ones that are unpalatable, have to be told for the sake of our country. And 2026 is the year of this election. It's also the 250th anniversary of our Declaration of Independence, when our brave founding fathers decided that the status quo was not okay, that they wanted to chart their own course. They wanted to believe in something bigger than simply being slaves to a colonial power. And if I'm running for governor, if I'm running to do one thing as the 47th governor of Florida, it is to reassert the founding words of that sacred document, that all men are created equal.
Beautiful. Well, everyone, this has been your guest, James Fishback. This is the Jack Neel Podcast. Appreciate you coming on, man.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, brother.
An honor.